I was requested to look at the case since I'm a cold case detective because it is 20 years later and it's a high media case, and there was always these conspiracy theorists out there, and so I was just asked to look at the case, review it.
And in your reviews of this case, did you find anything different that made you believe it's anything but suicide?
No, nothing. But I had to clear up some issues that made people believe that there was some type of a cover-up. And one of those is that I had to process some film, some 35mm film that never was processed before.
Why wasn't it processed, and what did you find out?
At the time, in 1994, we would shoot our scenes with 35mm camera, and then we would back them up with Polaroids. And that's what we did in this case. And what the scene supervisor at the time, and I guess the powers that be at the time, decided, just don't develop the 35mm film and just use your Polaroids, because the case was labeled a suicide, and the medical examiner's office, they take photographs also, so the case actually shifts to them. So as in most cases, we would not have processed that 35mm film unless we were looking for something specific that also wasn't showed in the Polaroids. So I believed, let's get rid of this. People thinking that something else happened that did not happen, and develop the film.
Talk about, if you would, the one shot that you saw, and maybe you saw this in the Polaroids, that of his hands that makes you believe definitively this was a suicide.
Well, there was never one item that I said definitively that this actually was a suicide, but Kurt actually was positioning, had the weapon in his hand, had the 20-gauge shotgun in his hand, and actually it was his left hand. And by the time we found him, there was when the gun went off, the checkering on the stock actually caused an abrasion to his, I believe it was his thumb, and his hand was actually locked on the shotgun itself when it fell down. That was actually something that kind of stood out. There were a few things also in the photographs that helped me as an investigator put together what occurred when he went up on top of the garage into the pottery room. Well, what I believe happened was that Kurt went up there for one purpose, was to commit suicide. And I believe he did not want to be found and be revived, or so he wanted to make a sure way to kill himself. And I believe Kurt went upstairs, and I believe he may have been under some narcotics at the time. I believe he came back up to the greenery, finished off his note, walked, set it up on top of a pottery, or some potting soil, and when he was done with it, he took his pen and plunged the pen, impaled the pen right through the center of the note into the potting soil. He walked back and sat down. He already had the shotgun out. He loaded the shotgun. I believe then he took his heroin and injected himself with 1 or 2 syringes, and put the little orange tops that covered the needle on the syringe, put those away, and then took the fateful shot and killing himself. The amount of heroin that he injected was like 10 times what normally anybody would have taken, even a heavy heroin user. And so I believe he gave himself a fatal dose of black tar heroin. And I believe he would only have been able to survive that or stay conscious with that no more than a couple minutes. So it was obvious to me that he did not want to survive. He killed himself because of the shotgun blast, but the heroin would have did the trick also. I asked the King County Medical Examiner's Office some questions that I don't think were addressed earlier in the initial investigation. One was, the amount of heroin that Kurt ingested, that he gave himself, was an extreme amount of heroin. I don't think they've seen anybody with an overdose, in our county at least, that had that much of heroin inside of him. Well, his hand positions were that his hand was were across the right hand fell to the side, the left hand was holding was cradling the Remington 20 gauge shotgun. His head was turned to the left. It wasn't as it's only taking a shotgun wound to the head. It wasn't as gory as some people would actually think because it was a 20 gauge shotgun. And he was fully clothed. Like I say, it was the unit was very sparse. So he was in arm's reach of his heroin and his kit, as we call it, his kit, and in arm's reach of his root beer. And you see on the floor there'd be a couple cigarette butts around. And I think even a layperson could after a while just realize this is what transpired. And the box is shot. There's the photo of the box of the shotgun shells that next to his left foot, where he'd be sitting up and loading the gun. The heroin kit has syringes in it, a spoon, Q-tips, cream that you'd put on a sore or a exposed needle hole in your skin. There was some black tar heroin in there, gram sizes. And the spoon itself is actually burnt from constant use. What are people going to gain from seeing pictures of Kurt Cobain laying on the ground with his hair blown back, with blood coming out of his nose and trauma to his eyes from a penetrating shotgun wound? How's that going to benefit anybody? It wasn't going to change my decision that this was a suicide, and actually I'm the one who makes the decision, finally, do we go forward or not? And morally, I would not be able to justify that. Legally, I can't justify doing that also. There is a need, it's in the statute, if there's actually more of a need, then we can show those photos, but there is none. There is none at all.